Welcome, everyone. So, glad to have you all here. And we're talking about why we don't get decisions made on the initiatives that we put forward to execs. And maybe some ideas on how we might be able to fix it. Because there is a hidden or maybe unpopular truth. Product work is really all about business. Hate to tell you this, but it's not just about user outcomes. It's not just about customer outcomes. We exist here to be in business. And we do that because, quite frankly, that money, that profit is the fuel of the business. And without it, frankly, we're not going anywhere. We're not going to survive. We're not going to still be in business. You might be a social enterprise. The reality is you still need that money to fuel you. You're only doing the social enterprise to generate the money, maybe to do a mission. You might have a mission. We might talk about mission-oriented teams, but it is still a business. So who am I? Well, I'm Phil Hornby. I'm a product coach, product leadership coach. I've trained too many people to count. I've coached a fair number of people as well. And I have this fundamental mission of helping people think clearly, make strong decisions, to take action and drive those high impact outcomes. I distilled that mission probably about a year ago because I realized that's really what I've been doing. But my previous mission actually said something about creating entrepreneurial product teams, because one of my fundamental beliefs is that the product person is the entrepreneur in the room. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about business here. So how did I earn or learn that knowledge? Well, quite fundamentally, when I started my career back in 2001, straight out of university, I was an engineer, but I was working for a managing director who was a former product manager back in the 80s. And so product ways of thinking were always part of how I worked. And in those days, I was building business cases. I was creating roadmaps. I was figuring out what we were going to create as the products in our business. It was just the fundamental foundation of how we approach things. Like, you had to know how you're going to make money, because this was we varied between 15 and 25 person company. We needed to know that we could fuel ourselves to stay alive and keep the business going. And then later, we were acquired by Trimble, large sort of American outfit based out of California. And there, fundamentally, it was the same. We were a $1.3 billion company, but as a product manager, the first product manager that came from that original business, I ended up inheriting a $300 million product portfolio with P&L responsibility. Now, don't worry, get scared. We basically don't see P&L responsibility very often anymore, at least not at the IC level. That was an IC role. But often in the leadership role, it starts to get more and more important. And we should still be able to talk about it. More recently, I led product at a company called Continental. For anyone American in the audience, you'll think hotels or airlines, but actually I'm talking about the tire company, but a whole different division that had nothing to do with tires and everything to do with automotive, electronics, and software. And there, again, I needed to care about the profitability. Why are we doing these things? So I went through that process of learning it and applying it, and it was always a fundamental part of how I thought as a product manager. It's interesting, over the last 10 years or so, that's become less and less important, it seems. And I think we've missed a trick. I think we're now seeing the return of that commerciality into many organizations in the product role, because fundamentally zero interest is gone. Money is not cheap anymore. And so neat thinking about profitable growth and actually making money is key. Why are we doing these things? And just to kind of throw out there, it's not just me that's been on that journey. Actually, the godfather himself, Mr. Kagan, spent enough time with him over the years. And one of the stories he tells at the start of his product career is how when he thought he wanted to be a product manager and he went off in HP and found someone to teach him product management or asked them to be his mentor, they basically looked at him and said, "Do you know anything about business?" And when he couldn't answer any business questions, they kind of said, you need to work this out. And kind of went to go away. And a few months later, actually, they turned back up and said, I've organized for you to spend a lot of time with this person from the finance team. They're going to teach you the business side. They're going to upskill you on this, because if you don't know this, you just can't do the work. So today we're going to cover 3 secrets. I mean, I kind of controversializing them into secrets, but 3 kind of key elements that you really need to consider in terms of how you deal with that commercial side of things. Because I mean, I could probably put 15 secrets in here, but we'll start with 3. Let's do some foundational stuff. Number 1, you need to learn to speak that language. You need to speak pounds and pence, dollars and cents, euros and cents, yen and whatever else, renminbi, wherever you are in the world. You need to be able to speak in those business terms. And there's a ton of terms in there. Like this page is just filled up. I could actually have spent, if I felt like it, spending a day, I could have literally just put so many terms into this page that it would be illegible. You wouldn't be able to read them. There are so many financial terms. But here are some core ones. A revenue, net profit margin, ARPU, TAM, SAM, SOM, LTV, CAC. In the chat, how many of those do you think you understand? Most of them, Lily? Then you're in the enlightened few, I will say. 70% of them, Kieran? Okay, that's still a good start. And about half Cascade, yeah. I would hesitate to guess that a lot of people have heard of them. But how many do you use regularly in a conversation? In that, just when you're talking about what you can do or why you would do things in your business. Give me a little bit more flavor in the chat. How regularly do you use some of these terms? Daily, weekly, monthly? How often do you talk in financial terms? Kieran, it's not often enough. Yeah, so true, so true. Well, and I kind of kept that first secret relatively light because I wanted to focus on a few more of them. Really, we could spend a day like teaching you a financial data or financial stuff. Like one of the reasons I did an MBA, in fact, myself, was if I went all the way back to that role at Trimble, I spotted a glass ceiling in my organization without one. And one of the things I recognized was it really brought that deep financial understanding, that ability to speak the business language. Now, in many, I guess, product organizations these days, an MBA isn't necessary. It used to be the standard qualification of a product manager. In fact, every Harvard MBA used to want to be a product manager because they heard the phrase mini CEO. And so they thought that was cool. So maybe you don't need an MBA, but you still need some of the knowledge that goes in there. If I remember doing my strategy and my marketing module on the MBA and going through that and thinking, that's basically 90% of my product work. Well, add the financial bits in and we get the rest of it. So really, everything when it comes to product work comes down to, I would say, one of 4 things that we should be driving towards. Increasing revenue, protecting revenue, reducing costs, or avoiding costs. Yes, you might say, what about growth? Well, in the zero interest rate period, yes, you could think about growth, but ultimately, unprofitable growth puts you at risk. And if you've got a long runway with a lot of funding, maybe you can get away with it. But there is still a hypothesis there that growth leads to increased revenue. Because by having more growth, we're going to sell more. And we may be able to, through economies of scale, reduce our costs. So there is a tacit assumption there, but it requires a fair amount of money, deep pockets to be able to survive it. I'd rather, and I think definitely the trend is at the moment, is towards growing in a more sustainable way, growing in a way that actually you can fund and it self-funds. There's a great book called The Product Mindset that I think that's literally one of the the pillars that it talks about, it's like basically the product needs to wash its own face. It needs to be done in a profitable way. In fact, that really means that what we can really do is simplify those 4 boxes down to just 2. It's not really increasing revenue. It's not reducing costs. It's increasing profits, and it's protecting profits. Because if you increase the revenue and keep your costs the same, you're increasing profits. If you're doing something to protect against increased costs, you're protecting profits, because profit is that's the reality of what we're doing. I'm sure you've all heard the old adage of revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality. Well, the profits are the things that really create the fuel that keep us going. And most product people end up, I believe, kind of stopping a level early when they express why they're going to do something. So there's a really simple level. This is kind of how a product manager usually says what they want to do, how they justify it. There's something like, by doing something for a customer or solving a particular problem, we expect to deliver an outcome, which in this sense is a change in customer behavior. Maybe that looks something like this. By removing onboarding friction, we expect to increase activation by 10%. Great, 10% more activation. What if every new customer we add costs us more than we make from them? We now say we're going to spend money 10% faster. And that's not necessarily a good thing. In fact, there was a great conversation at a product tank I was at a few months ago where they worked out that literally they were losing 10 cents a month on every single user. And so whilst they were driving these great engagement metrics, overall, they were actually making themselves worse off because they were losing money on every new one. Hey. So really, when I think of it, we need to go that next level. We need to add that next layer of information. We add the impact, the business metric, so we can actually say, this is what we believe is going to happen. For example, that might be in this case that we were going to increase ARR. That wasn't even on my list earlier. That's annual recurring revenue. Again, a classic metric that we would use. This is a hypothesis. We believe that if we increase activation, we're going to increase our annual recurring revenue. We know that this is a lagging metric. We know that we're not going to see this happen immediately. And so product outcomes are a great thing in terms of helping us measure more quickly and actually see the impact we're having in the shorter term over a quarter. But ultimately, if it doesn't translate into the impact, and we don't have a working hypothesis of how it translates into impact, why is a leader going to actually listen to us? And I guess it would be remiss of me to not add the extra bonus. Tell them why you believe that. Bringing that data, that anecdotes, the evidence. Maybe that's something like, we believe that this because 30% of people trying to do onboarding don't complete it. So we believe we can save about a third of those. And our follow-up interviews report confusion during signups. So we know that there's friction there. It's not just that people are saying, I'm not interested anymore. There's friction that's slowing it down. And that evidence, that why, is also going to help get people's buy-in. Then we also need to know what impact matters the most. Because not all impact is created equal. Revenue might be the thing you care about, but it might not be. Profit might be the thing you care about. What we really want to know is, what's the top business metric in your organization? So in the chat again, let me know, what's the most important metric in your organization? What do people talk about? What's the metric that comes up in every town hall meeting that's talked about as a business metric? ARR, Joe? Yeah, that's a very common one. ARR again. Growth of usage of content and number of publications, Kieran. Because that feels like on the product metric, the North Star metric side. Interesting. Yeah. But I bet there's a financial one that they also talk about as well. And that's the one I'm looking for. It's quite common that ARR is at the top, although I would say sometimes growth in revenue, so top line revenue, which might be measured monthly, annual, recurring. But yeah, look, I generally personally prefer to see profit at the top, if I'm absolutely honest. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the whole product debate of outputs over outcomes, or outcomes over outputs even. Let's get it the right way around. The reality is there are almost 4 levels. There's almost a hierarchy here. You have your inputs, the hours you burn, the outputs, the things you ship, the outcomes, the customer behavior changes, and the impact, that business level metric. Now, typically, people look at it this way and they see this kind of hierarchy that goes all the way up. And if you put the right inputs in, then you can get the right outputs, and then you'll drive the right outcomes, and eventually we'll get the impact. It's definitely a reasonable way of looking at it, but it doesn't always work quite that linearly, shall we say. Amazon, for example, they talk about controllable inputs in their metrics, because if you can clearly figure out which inputs you can change that will drive what outputs, that's super powerful. Now, what they call an input is more of an input to the level above, so it could still be an output. For example, they know that if they have 10,000 more products in a particular category, it is likely to drive more purchasing, which is likely to drive then more revenue or more profit. And so they create initiatives around, well, let's get more products on the platform, because that they know has a high correlation. But rarely do we even know what that correlation is. And yeah, Lily, as you say, inputs are rarely considered. Although I do remember when COVID hit that everyone started measuring everyone's hours again. It's like, how many hours did you work? Are you at your desk? Does it matter? As long as we're moving the needle and getting stuff done. Now, there might be a conversation about, well, are we giving you enough work, that sort of thing, but it's still, I think the core message really has to be, at the business level, we care about impact. Your CEO cares about the impact over everything else, and the outcomes are a way of measuring on that path, but we need to have a working hypothesis of how they connect. And so you might look at it this way. Really, there are 2 metric trees. On the left-hand side, we have our North Star metric, our product metrics, and they ladder down. At every layer, you can think about what are the input metrics to the next level above. Like every release we make happens to generally trigger a certain amount of interest in the market, which might get more people clicking on to try things, etc. We can actually put outputs on there if we really want to. Like the new publication for yourself, I'm sure, Kieran, drives people to go and read a bit more because they go and look at the new stuff, and that's interesting. And so there may be some correlation between publication and the growth in content usage, for example. On the other hand, we've got another tree of metrics that maybe has ARR at the top. I'd say I prefer to put profit at the top, because profit has an impact of both the revenue and the costs. And ARR, if we're not considering the cost side of things, well, we might still be doing unprofitably. So having those two, having kind of revenue and profit as kind of the next layer down, often makes more sense to me. And then what contributes to each of those? Well, it might be number of subscribers. It might be number of items published. The metrics that go into each of these layers, you can gradually ladder your way down and try to figure out what drives the top business metric and what drives the North Star metric. Because the reality is you're looking at them from different views. But really what you can actually do is bring these 2 trees together. And here in the middle, where the 2 come together, in this overlap point, is actually where you have your highest leverage. because this is where you have a straight line to that top business metric and your North Star metric. The thing you're being asked to drive as a product person and the thing that the business cares about. And you can clearly articulate a hypothesis of this thing drives this and this. And by the way, if you're operating over here on the other things, like the product metrics over here that don't ladder up to your top business metric, that's your lowest leverage. That's the point where it's going to be really hard to articulate how are you contributing to the overall goals of the organization, because most of the time, if you go in those town hall, deals won, revenue won, profitability levels will be at the top of the conversation. And that's because ultimately anyone who's on the C-suite is a business person. They care about that commerciality. The product person, part of the reason why we were called the CEO of the product is because we are the business person in the product team. Ultimately, those three secrets, those three kind of headlines I would emphasize to you is one, you need to speak that language of business. You need to learn those different terms, how to use them, what they mean. You need to communicate that impact, not just the product outcomes, but how you're actually going to drive impact for your business, that hypothesis of how they connect. And ideally, the impact that matters most, connects it up to that most important thing for your business. How might I be able to help? Well, I might have just launched a program called The Business for Product People. It's fundamentally a 6-module sort of course, one module every 2 weeks. The 6 modules are there: business thinking and revenue models, financial literacy and understanding product impact, market analysis and business model fundamentals, business case development and scenario planning, financial forecasting and metrics-driven decision-making, communicating business cases and stakeholder buy-in. The structure overall is that it is happening every 2 weeks. You'll do first some self-paced learning, then a bit of homework, and then we'll get together for a live workshop to actually dig into things and actually really explore the material. Instead of me regurgitating it live to you, you can watch me pre-recorded when you want, and then when we're together, we get really deep and into the material. Now, the list price, as it stands today, is £1,000, but for my first cohort, because we are just kicking off, we're first cohort in start of April, and especially for the folks on the session today, I'm offering a discount of $750, and including in that is also a one-off session with myself where we'll talk about your real issues. That QR code will get you there, and I'll also stick the link in the chat. Thanks for being here, everyone. Have a great day.